Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to today's video. Today, we're going to be going over something quite interesting, quite fascinating, which is the state of California. Now, this isn't usually the type of content I make. Usually, I talk about like competitive elections or just the country as a whole. However, I thought today's video would be special and take a look at the governor's election in the state of California. Now, you say, why are you talking about California? California isn't typically a competitive state. However, in 2026, despite the Democrats at least to be slightly favored for the midterms, just because of their other party being out of power, and that the party out of power always makes gains, they might have a shortcoming, which is a pretty big shortcoming if Republicans are able to succeed in this, which is have a competitive election in California. Now, let me be very clear, though, before we get into the meat of it, I still think Democrats are favored to win here. However, I am going to be raising a very big concern that Democrats could be really sweating bullets over, which is the governor's election in California. Now, there's many reasons to think why. It's not really because that California trended to Donald Trump in 2024 and he did really well there. It did, that's true, and they did pass Proposition 50 by a lot of margin. So it's not that. But instead, it's a loophole in the voting laws that California has. Next year in 2026, the governor's election will be up to replace two-term limited Governor Gavin Newsom, who's a Democrat. However, California's election laws operate that only a few handful of states in the country operate as, and it's becoming less common. But in California, they have it. It's called a jungle primary, which basically means the two top candidates in a primary that, with all the primaries combined, advance to the general election. So what typically happens, like what happened in 2022, is that for the Democrats, Gavin Newsom got the most amount of votes, and for the Republicans, Bryant Dale got the most amount of votes. However, when you combine the two primaries on both sides together, those two were the highest in all of the primaries, percentage-wise, I believe, throughout the whole entire state, which is why you got a Republican versus a Democrat. Obviously, the Democrat wins because it's a blue state. However, in California, it's not looking like it's about to happen because the primaries are becoming very interesting. You have, for the Democrats, I counted 14 Democrats are running. And, to be clear, some of them are no-names candidates. However, a lot of them are high-profile Democrats. You have former California Democrat Party chair, vice chair, and was a state controller, elected office. You have former mayor of Los Angeles. You have superintendent, another statewide elected official running, Eric Swalwell, who is getting momentum. We'll talk about him in a minute. U.S. rep. You have Katie Porter. We'll talk about her in a little bit. High profile. She was a former representative for a competitive part of the state. You have a lot of wealthy businessmen who are running, who are able to raise a lot of money, who are going to take up a lot of votes. You have Xavier Becerra, who is U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services under the Biden administration, and former Attorney General of California, high profile. A lot of these people are getting a lot of endorsements from other high-profile people, like other U.S. representatives, statewide officials. This primary is getting split. And the problem is that no Democrat is really getting traction because you had Katie Porter, who seemed to be the clear favorite to win and probably be the next governor. However, she had some scandals come out recently of videos of her mistreating her staff, yelling at her staff, cursing at her staff. These types of scandals won't cost you a campaign, but it certainly hasn't made her look good. And it has allowed a lot of these Democratic candidates to catch up. And now pretty much the Democratic primary is split. While you have the Republican primary, you still have a lot of people running, but it's only 12, which is a little bit less than the Democrats. Most of these, unlike the Democrats, are all new names. Most of them are not getting a lot of traction. Some of them will. You have Daniel Mercury gaining traction. You have Steve Hilton, political commentator, pundit, and you have Chad Bianco, Riverside County Sheriff Coroner. So he's elected in a very competitive county. Two strong candidates who won't win against the Democrats statewide. However, it's only between the two of them that are getting the primary vote. Whereas the Democrat primary, it's all getting split. So what Democrats are worrying about which I still think isn't going to happen, but it's getting very, very possible, is that you could possibly see if the Democrat primary gets split enough and the Republicans primary doesn't get split too much, you could end up with two Republicans on the ballot. And then that would by default give California a Republican governor, which would be a very crazy thing you see in the news story. If you look at the polling, the most recent polling you have for candidate, Chad Bianco is actually leading. He's the number one candidate. He's getting 13%, which is not a lot, which is really interesting. Second place, you have Eric Swalwell, Democrat. He's getting 12%. And then tied with him for 3rd% is Steve Hilton, another Republican. You see Katie Porter, who was thought of to be the leading candidate, only 11%. And then you have the rest of it split between some other no names. Xavier Baraka's at 4%. Not a lot, but he's catching up. Undecided, still at 31%. So what's interesting is that if you get rid of Eric Swalwell, let's just say he goes down a notch or so, you see two Republicans, Steve Hilton and Chad Bianco, could be the top candidates. And with the loophole of this system, you could see some really interesting scenarios that seems to happen. Possibly, Eric Swalwell and Chad Bianco could be the two Republicans, and then you would have two Republicans at the top of the ballot, thus flipping the California governorship Republican. Now, again, I still don't think it's going to happen. However, it's very, very possible that it does end up happening. Obviously, if you had a statewide election in California, you would, between Republican and Democrat, it'd probably look similar to this, maybe a little bit bluer. But it's certainly very interesting. So the fact that, we're talking about California is very fascinating. We'll definitely see how it goes. I'll be covering this election closely, actually. Nonetheless, California. So if you're interested in political content, follow the channel. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Helps out the channel. And join the channel if you'd like to join the channel if you'd like to support it. And I hope you guys have a good day.